Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. The Road to Autonomy is brought to you in part by Stantec Generation AV. Stantec Generation AV combines some of the most experienced AV experts in the industry with the resources of a global engineering firm. Stantec Generation AV provides education, consulting, assessment, and guidance to any industry interested in autonomous vehicles. Learn more at stantec.com. Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to have Jordan Sun, Chief Innovation Officer, City of San José, California. Welcome to the podcast, Jordan.
Thank you very much for having me, Grayson.
I'm very excited to have you here. And before we get started, I want to say thank you for your service. You did 2 tours in Afghanistan. You showed an immense amount of courage, and the nation's very thankful. So thank you.
Thank you for saying that. It's I'm one of many others that have raised a hand, so I can't take all the glory there.
You served in Afghanistan in 2012 and 2020. How would you compare and contrast those 2 different tours of duty?
Yeah, it's I would say sort of my generation, being a post 9/11 generation individual who joined, we felt very much so that this is part of our generation's fight, if you will. And so when you look at 2012, this was towards the end of the surge under the Obama administration. And really the key difference there is that we were still very much so outside with the local community, thinking about capacity building and really learning sometimes for the first time how to do that, even though we've been years into the war. Fast forward, though, to 2020, it was very different, where I think there was a lot more injection of technology. We're obviously a much more collapsed footprint. COVID also happened. And then subsequently, we were also told that, we were going to start planning to pull out with the Taliban and government peace deal talks. So both times, actually, I was part of a pullout. 2012, President Obama at the time said we were pulling out of Afghanistan. And then fast forward 2020, we were told that we're pulling out again. And so it's interesting actually going back to some of the same regions that I used to serve in 8 years later and seeing some of the footprints even expanded, which was a fascinating comparison.
Was 2012 more tactical, where 2020 was more focused on software and crisis response against Taliban and ISIS attacks?
So my role was entirely different. In 2012, I was part of a conventional infantry unit. And in 2020, I was supporting special operations in a technology role. So very different units, very different missions, very different levels of response. And so in 2020, I was focused more on a national level response, whereas in 2012, I was focused very provincially. And the largest I would go is regionally, which is the Western region. I would also say the key other difference is just the professionalism of our Afghan counterparts that I really came to appreciate. 2012, there was still, a lot of corruption that we would deal with, a lot of morale issues. 2020, my gosh, I mean, the younger officers that are, 25, 26, 27 years old, but promoted very quickly through the ranks, they were very professional. Very much so straight edge in terms of walking the line, in terms of what is good behavior, what is immoral behavior in terms of corruption. And they all felt that they were, sons and daughters of Afghanistan. And so there's this concept of this nation state that emerged. I think this is not, I don't have a large sample size to make this statement qualified, but from my experiences talking to younger Afghan officers, there was actually a sense of nation state, which was not something that I've seen previously, which was more divided along tribes and religious factions.
You could say that it was a sense of pride. We want to get our country back. We believe in our country, and what you did, and the other men and women in sacrifices and bravery. And they said, we want to do this, and it's powerful. Were there certain roles that the Afghans played? Did they work on software with you? Was it what kind of stuff did they do to support?
Yeah, it was actually quite interesting because, in 2012, you were still very SMS based in terms of a lot of the response. Fast forward, I mean, I'm a T-Mobile customer, and I would have data as I traveled to all the cities in Afghanistan. And so I would just put myself on, the international plan, and I would have my own, cell phone service with 3G, sometimes 4G speeds. So it is very different. The second part is, to your point, this time around, I've had Afghan officers come up to me like, hey, look, I actually studied computer science as an undergrad. And here's some things that I think we can do better on. And they're like showing me, you know, workflow designs and mock-ups. And I was just like, oh my gosh, and it's like, yeah, and I built a quick web-based prototype if you want to take a look at it on my computer. And so it was very cool to see how Afghans themselves were trying to build software tools to better enable their operations as well as information sharing.
That's awesome. There's no other way to say it. It goes back to the pride and this whole philosophy I have of always learning, and these individuals, the Afghan soldiers and officers, wanted to learn. So you're part of the Special Operations Joint Task Force in 2020. You built a software product. What is it like building a software product in theater?
It was very interesting, to say the least, because when you think about where engineers excel in terms of work environments, right? They prefer some are more individual contributors, some are more collaborative, but generally they need their quiet time and they need stable internet and they need all the modern tools, hardware wise to be able to do their jobs. The funny thing is, we had some of the best hardware there that we were very fortunate enough to purchase. The challenge was sometimes the internet would cut out and then you just wouldn't be able to do anything. The other part is the normal Army works during certain hours, especially when you're working as part of a senior general staff. But then our developers work in different hours more successfully. And so actually we ended up having multiple hours where, there's times I'm like, hey, look, y'all work at night because that's when the internet's most stable, bandwidth is most available. And they also felt quieter and without being disturbed by someone constantly walking in and saying like, hey, I need this from you, or hey, I have this idea. And then you would have to entertain them and whatever, I want to build an app idea someone has. So it was interesting there. The other part is, look, when it came to customer interviews, when it came to prototyping and testing, when it came to scaling out and deploying the product, it was great to be there because you can, firsthand meet with Afghan counterparts, fly out there, talk to them, see what they're dealing with, but also talk to our NATO and U.S. counterparts that are sometimes their advisors and seeing, the difference in sort of user personas and pain points and opportunities for the product.
Was the software you developing in theater, was that used in theater during your tour of duty or other individuals' tours of duty?
Yep. So it was used towards the latter part of my time there once we started deploying it and making it live. And look, we pivoted 3 times while we're there. I can't, in terms of what we did for crisis response. And so, every time we got close to a nugget of truth, we realized like, hey, we need to pivot here. And we had different, our metrics would change sometimes depending on, we try to be as quantifiable as possible in terms of what the performance we wanted out of it. In the end, it was an enterprise tool. And I think also I'm very fortunate that people were very forgiving of sometimes experiences because sometimes they're out of our control, like the internet cutting out or the internet suddenly, being very limited in bandwidth and they just so happen to be using your tool. And they were like, oh, it must be the tool. I'm like, no, it's actually your internet. But you can't say that to your customers sometimes,
You could say you've learned customer service better than anybody. You understand the pivot. You're based in Silicon Valley, and for over 14 years, you served as a Silicon Valley squadron commander for the U.S. Army as a reservist. What do you do in this role? Do you take what you've learned in theater and look for products and services that can help the Army advance its technological needs to help our men and women?
Yeah, so I've had about 14 years of service, but the tech scouting role was very much so the last 3-4 years. Prior to that, I was a officer in training, and then subsequently spent time in the infantry and then in the foreign affairs community. But really, the last couple of years, we went from very like I'm interested in all things tech related that fit our verticals in terms of the Army, the active duty components, Army modernization verticals, things like future vertical lift to next generation artillery or fires to networking tools. But what we were really interested in is trying to like, okay, where can we really bring the best of Silicon Valley's strengths? And then how can we best be founder friendly first? And I think that was a very different lens that I think often a lot of other Army tech scouts take, which is, what is the Army interested in first? And then let's protect Army equities. And on my end, I'm like, look, it's really hard doing business with DoD, with the Army, and it's really hard also getting people exposed to what we're interested in. And so I just want to be an ambassador here at the very least to let you know that we're here. We're friendly to talk to. We can talk both tech, business, but also gov. And my team right now, we've got folks who are senior product managers at some of the most notable companies, such as Netflix. We have software engineers at Apple. We have folks who are partners at Lightspeed. We have a ton of folks that also are graduates of your top 10 MBA programs. And so it's a good diversity of both networks that they could tap into in terms of founders, but also venture investors. And really, the other part I want to tap on is it's really important for us to play fairly in that ecosystem, to be like, hey, not only are we available, but how can we bring back your insights in terms of what the DoD should do better, the Department of Defense should do better to encourage more venture backable startups to be able to do and want to do business with the government as a whole.
Did you learn these diplomatic skills through your stint at the U.S. State Department? Is that where you learned, you understand cultures, you understand nuances that only anybody that's served in foreign service would understand? Do you apply that to your job as a tech scout?
It's I think so much of my experience at the State Department is, you go through a lot of training that makes you very good at what you do. But I think so much of it is also just being naturally screened by it, where there's just, it's personality based, a little bit of luck, and you get your foot in the door. So, I think the key thing that I took away from the State Department was just that moment in my life was coming off of my first job, which was in FX sales and trading, foreign exchange sales and trading, which is really, I worked with a lot of macro funds, hedge funds, making big bets on where the future of the world was going to go in terms of politics, in terms of economics. And so that was really applying what I learned there, and being someone who graduated and survived the financial crisis, applying that into the front lines of how the world was changing from a macro level. So that was really the experience I took away from it. And obviously, the people skills, it honed all that a little bit. But, I wouldn't say I'm the, most suave individual walking into a cocktail party and able to remember everybody's name. And next thing you know, everybody wants to talk to you. I tend to be actually a fly on the wall in a lot of these bigger events.
But you're seasoned. You have a background in finance. You served in the armed forces and the Army. You understand being a diplomat through the State Department. You put this together. You're a very interesting individual. And now you're the Chief Innovation Officer for the City of San José. What attracted you to that job? Was it an opportunity to put all your skills to make a difference? What was that attraction?
Grayson, I love the way you said that, to put all my skills to make a difference. It's interesting because I would say what attracted to me initially was, the pandemic hit. I've spent most of my service overseas when I did serve, our people's interests. And I really didn't feel like I did enough for the community. And sometimes I was scratching my head. I was like, well, what could I actually do tangibly to change someone's life? In terms of here in America. I've had friends that, did mentoring, I used to volunteer a lot when I was in high school, and it's like, but it's not scalable, it's not sustainable. And so when the pandemic hit, that was when it just opened up my mind. I was like, I need to do something about this. And I just found myself, after speaking to the team and seeing the mayor, like unable to sleep that night, thinking about if I walked away and went back to tech and lived my comfortable salary life there and worked on interesting problems and had a lot of reduced frictions in terms of getting to think where I need to be for building products. That's all good and dandy, but in the end, is that making the world better at the most critical moment? And so now when you mentioned, tying it all together, I thought, I was like, well, gosh, maybe if not me, then who? And if it is me, then I need to put skin in the game and give it a try. And so ultimately, I took a big pivot to help out. It's like, who knows where you go after this, but it's been rewarding, and you can't, I can never blame myself for at least not trying to try to give back more when I thought everyday Americans needed it.
You can make the clear correlation and the connection to leadership from your military training. The military does an incredible job of training young men and women on leadership, and I have the utmost respect for the military and the history of the military. But I love to know, what did the mayor say to you that you were unable to sleep? Was there something so profound? He said, you know what? We're in the 21st century in America. We got to stop this, and I can make a difference. I can help these individuals. What was it that the mayor said that you just could not sleep?
It was really, so it's kind of a couple of things. One, I don't want to sound like I was predicting the future, but I remember clipping the very first, I use Reuters. I know a lot of people don't use Reuters for the news. I think I'm like the only person in Silicon Valley that uses Reuters. Okay, you use Reuters too, great. But my thing is, I remember clipping that first article of Patient Zero in Wuhan, where someone's like, oh, I think this person has flu-like symptoms, but we don't know what it is. And it was just a very tiny, no more than an inch on my screen of text. And I was like, oh gosh. And so when this exploded, it was just this grinding sense of like, I wish I could do something, but I'm overseas doing something else. And also, I'm not saying that wasn't important, but I thought that the reverberating impact and deaths of this would infinitely be bigger than what we were even doing in Afghanistan, if I were to. And the second part is, yeah, when I talked to the mayor, I mean, like, look, he has been a phenomenal champion of democratizing technology, especially emerging technology, for the benefit of all community members and residents. And I think that's a very unique angle that often people either say, let's just go for the highest willingness to pay and let's be done with that. And he was very much so able to create win-win opportunities through public-private partnerships with industry to say this is beneficial for you from a business standpoint, but also beneficial for our residents, and especially our low-income residents. And this is how we do it. And so, understanding where his position is and his leadership has been in terms of his track record of public-private partnerships was very interesting. And the other part, look, I think he's a very decent individual. He's rejected pay increases himself because he felt like the mayor's job is not supposed to get paid. The mayor's job is supposed to serve the residents. And I have absolute admiration for him on that, because as someone who's taken multiple pay cuts in my lifetime now to do public service. And so, just seemed like it was a match made. And like I said, timing was everything. The pandemic didn't happen, it probably wouldn't have swayed my decision, but the pandemic was the big push.
For the record, I read Reuters. Reuters is awesome, and they do great things. You look at the approach the mayor has, and service is a high calling, and it's a sacrifice to serve. It's an honorable thing to serve, and what you're describing to the mayor clearly defines leadership. And then in November 2020, the Center for Digital Government announced that the City of San Jose was named the nation's most innovative local government. Was that because it was the mayor's approach to service and dedication? Was that what drove that, or what drove that accomplishment there?
Yeah, I really can't take credit for that, because that was so much of a years in the making. And so it is a team effort of both folks in the mayor's office, including my predecessor, Shireen, but also folks in the city manager's office, folks, our chief information officer, and many others. And so, it is a collective effort that brought our city to win that award. But I would say that the other thing is, look, when people talk to the city of San Jose, just yesterday, we had this new partnership opportunity, and we have the mayor's office here and the city manager's office and others from different departments. And the reverberating statements that come through often from partners, industry partners meeting us for the very first time, like, wow, this city is seen as a city that leads others. And if you can't do it here, how can you do it in other places? And so they see us as sort of this beachfront, if you will, of novel business models. And I use the term business models here in terms of how government and industry can come together to deploy and to develop emerging technologies that do benefit all. And so I think that's really the key thing. And look, we did a lot of effort. We put in a lot of effort in digitizing ourselves to make sure that we try to stay ahead. But we recognize that, I mean, if I were to snap a finger, I would love for government one day to deliver consumer grade experiences. But we recognize that we're still falling short of that. And we continuously try to think, how else can we invest in our talent, in our tools, and be able to deliver that level of experience one day.
How is the city working to overcome the digital divide?
Yeah, we have multiple paths. It's more of a trident approach to overcoming the digital divide. I would say the first thing that we've done is invest heavily in connectivity. And so, during the pandemic, during our last budget message, the mayor directed $10+ million in investments on bringing connectivity solutions to our residents. So that's split between community Wi-Fi investments that we've connected up to 100,000 residents in the east side of San Jose to community Wi-Fi. And so we now need to make sure those experiences are up to par. But that's a huge leap forward, and that was led by the city manager's office and the library and the emergency operations center. And then on the flip side of things, we also delivered close to 16,000 hotspots in partnership with AT&T. And those are to plug in gaps where often folks are not reachable by Wi-Fi or do not even have fiber or other, they have very limited broadband infrastructure connectivity there. And so we were able to deliver those things. The second part is thinking about device access. We made a significant effort in terms of pushing for device access. We started out with 67,000 device shortage for our students. And by the beginning of this year, we were down to less than 6,000 students who still need a device. And so that number will fluctuate a little bit based off recycling, but a lot of it was due in parts to, our partnership with the county school, Santa Clara County of Education, the school districts, the library, but also our corporate donors that put in, close to $3-4 million into bridging, close to $3 million into bridging that digital divide in terms of the device access needs. And we're still seeing a lot of very strong corporate interest in terms of plugging away, and we're trying to create novel projects now to more sustainably bring devices to our residents with a company called Revivin, which is a benefits corporation out in the East Coast. And then the third is our investment and commitment to digital literacy, and that is a sustainability factor. And our San Jose Digital Inclusion Fund, which is a $24 million digital inclusion fund launched during the pandemic kicked off, we've got 23 community-based organizations where they receive funding through permitting fees economic gains created by accelerating permitting of 5G small cell networks with AT&T, Verizon, and Mobility, now T-Mobile. And by doing that, we're able to invest very heavily in educating folks on low-cost internet plans, ensuring that they are connected to broadband at home, providing them access to a device, and then ultimately ensuring that they are brought to a UNESCO level 3 standard of digital literacy training. And so those three combined on connectivity, device access, and ultimately investment in digital literacy is how we see ourselves in building those foundational layers, those three layers, if you will, of making sure the digital divide is solved and bridged permanently.
It's a great goal because I have this philosophy: if you expose a child to a book or to a museum, you could change the world. Something they could spark in their imagination, and they can go change the world because they had access to the tools to allow their mind to do wonderful things. I love to know you're doing all this great work around literacy, around the 5G small cells, the East Side Wi-Fi, the hotspots. What percentage of the San Jose residents have access to high-speed internet?
Yeah, so our last polling was done a few years back when Mayor Sam Liccardo and my predecessor Shereen really started this journey. This is going back to even 2017. And we surveyed roughly about 95,000 of our residents from our surveys were determined to have a lack of access or no access to broadband internet. I think right now we are in the moment where I'm actually, as soon as the summer ends, I am going to be pushing for a resurveying of our residents, as well as a more data intensive approach of really aggregating all the data that sits disparately across our cities to understand really what is the remaining access and how best can we segment those who need access or those who need better access into addressing their needs. And so, I look at it as three pots, right? You got folks that have received access from us. And the question is that good enough for your needs? If not, how can we better improve that, right? And then you've got folks that are have quasi access that are not meeting broadband speeds, but still have access to internet. And then you've got the third, which either have no access or are resistant to ever having access. And I think you have to be very comfortable with that. You got 1% to 2% of every population that simply rejects, right? It's the same thing with anti-vaxxing. I'm not saying they're in the same category, but you always have dissent, and you have to be comfortable with that existing. And so I'm not going to force internet down someone's throat. I think that's not right. So, I think what we really need to do is then start making an assessment of our to resurvey our communities, understanding what remaining gaps are there and how best we can serve them in a more tailored fashion based off of what are their true needs. Is it cost? Is it infrastructure? Is it education? I'm really looking forward, honestly, to doing that.
You're going to learn a lot from the data. I'd be really curious, if one of the pediments is infrastructure, where, you're too rural or it's too far to go. That'd be really interesting that you can learn from the data. If individuals don't want to get it, well, you'll learn that as well. I'd be really curious in the data, is it certain pockets of certain areas of the city where they don't want it? And then you could dive into the data, what is causing that? So you have a diverse city of over 1 million residents. You're bridging the digital divide. You're working on giving broadband access. How are you approaching innovation as a whole? Is data the big thing driving all the decisions? Can you shed any light on that, how you're improving it? Because you're improving the quality of life of your residents. I'd love to know how you're improving innovation.
Yeah, and so it's funny because when I joined the city, we were very much so pandemic response. Look, my team was remote. I've got team members, from East Coast to SoCal. I found myself, look, when you join a new role and everybody's hair is on fire and everybody is busy trying to put out another fire, it was very interesting. And so we went from pandemic response over the last few months to shifting towards what I call my vision currently of building better basics as a smart city. Look, I've had the fortune of talking to a lot of other cities. Have been in government and corporate innovation. I, also dabbled in venture and seen, how trends, are hyped. And so there is, Professor Steve Blank at Stanford puts it very well, that there is an innovation theater that exists often in government, but I also see in corporate and healthcare, where you do a bunch of design sprints, you bring in some human-centered research, design, and then you leave with a bunch of stickies, pictures, and a blog. And what did you do? Okay, maybe I did some wireframing. Okay, great. But did you build anything? And after you built it, okay, did it get sustained, or is it just sitting there? And eventually someone in IT is like, hey, do you still want to be hosting this site, or can we shelve it? Because nobody's owning it, right? Nobody's owning the evolution of it. Nobody is saying this is the roadmap and we're going to stick to it. We're going to evolve it. And so there's something, this innovation theater stuff, that drives me nuts, because the last thing I want to do is do more innovation theater, but I also want to make sure that I'm not just not taking risks. And so it's about getting to more tangible outcomes. And so when I see what we needed in terms of building better basics, 3 pillars. And by the way, I will like to say that I think I might have been saying building better basics before building back better. So I should have published it earlier.
Do you have the trademark? You can get a royalty from the White House.
Yeah. Go to POTUS, right? Who am I to go to POTUS? Hey, that building word. So look, our first pillar is on all things data, as you mentioned. We need, as an organization, as enterprise, to do better in data. We need to do it ethically. We also need to do it legally, but we need to do better. And so we started investing heavily in our data capabilities, thanks to the Knight Foundation, who were really our seed investors. With a $60K grant, we were able to build up a 16-person data team and have really the first data science team hired by the city. And so as part of that, we were saying what is really important to drive good outcomes from data. And we realized that we needed to do something in data equity. And so how do we not only leverage data well to make good data-driven decisions, but also do it equitably and that lead to equitable outcomes? So that was the first. The second is our digital engagement and digital services task force that is now also soon to be a 14, 15-person team of mostly fellows led by another member of my team. And that's all about bringing better product management to building digital experiences. And so I always say, look, Jeff Bezos, when he launched Amazon.com, I know he might be controversial, but did he look at it as a website or did he look at it as a product? And people were like, oh, he looks at the product. It's yes. So all the things that we push out as websites, we need to think of that as products too, not just as, as a website that's static. So that is happening. And then the third is we're building in the process of pushing out an IoT network that I'm really excited about. And so when we think about, as well as improving our overall network capabilities for both, cellular data as well as overall broadband at home. And so when we think about those three pillars, data is sort of the brain of the city, if you will. The digital products and better digital engagement is the eyes, ears, nose, and mouth, because that's what's engaging with our residents, usually on that front end aspect. And then the third, in terms of our networks that we're building out, is sort of the rest of that nervous system. And so that's really how this smart city comes together through technology. And I think those are the minimum basics that you need to really be able to say you're a technology oriented city.
Would that be your definition of a smart city, of what you just described?
Yeah, I would say that is a loosely put together definition of smart city. I actually hate the term smart city. I don't know who coined it. I think it's probably coined even far back in the 80s, when during the information communication technology surges. But it's nice, it's cute, but it doesn't really drive home what needs to be done, which is like it's just a city that's powered by technology. And this is just another tool that you need to leverage to be able to better serve your residents and to be more efficient, and to be able to think about how you can scale versus throwing more bodies at a problem.
You're 100% right. You know this. You're in the driver's seat. Cities of the future are going to be powered by tech. You give this great thing with your pillars of data, the digital task force, and the IoT network. What about mobility? Where does mobility live in your vision of a city of the future, or the vision of the future of San Jose?
Yeah, it's interesting when I think of mobility. I'm obviously a big fan of the multimodal type of transportation networks. I see it as the moment you walk out of your house or the moment you deliver a good. I would even qualify that as mobility. And so, when you think about that, it's incredibly, I think three-dimensional than what we traditionally thought of mobility, which is we don't care about your mobility until you walk onto a sidewalk or until you get on in a car, right? That was like all these 70s, 80s, 90s. Maybe some people were still on horses. Just kidding. Maybe in Texas, where I was from, but actually, you do see horses here in San Jose. There are horse trails out. But look, I think mobility is going to depend on what we do better in terms of data management, right? When you think of traffic ops, when you think of Vision Zero programs, when you think about first responders to issues of autonomous vehicles and accidents related to autonomous vehicles. And I think on the other side of things is it's tied into very much so healthcare. When you think of public health, when you think about communities engaging each other, when you think about small business. And so I'm very, very interested in the future of mobility, where it goes from, once again, the moment someone steps out of their apartment, house, whatever, to also thinking about when they deliver, how they get their goods delivered in the future. It's beyond just a car or a bike.
I'm really happy you brought up healthcare. It's not talked a lot about. And I have this whole vision. I've talked to several doctors down in Southern California at Cedars-Sinai and St. John's about putting sensors in cars so somebody has, and when you have a fully automated vehicle, that's at level 4 or 5, they have a heart attack or they start to feel extremely unwell. It's sad, but it's a common trend that it happens. The car can alert St. John's or Cedars-Sinai, hey, patient A, she's having things. She's unconscious. We're going to drive the vehicle there. You have the team there ready to help that individual. That could not only save that individual's life, it could save the other individuals' lives on the road. And healthcare is going to play a huge role in the future mobility. So you're based in the heart of Silicon Valley in San Jose. Over 50 companies are testing autonomous vehicles in the state of California. What is your relationship like with the industry?
Yeah, I just want to say on the healthcare side of things, look, I've been very fortunate that folks at Lyft, for instance, have been very forward leaning in terms of offering opportunities for us to get folks vaccinated. They're thinking about healthcare all the time these days. And look, when you think about it, going back, what you mentioned here with, AI deployed on the client side saying like, hey, I think you're you look like, sounds like you're having a heart attack or whatever, you're unconscious or losing consciousness, is no different than a Lyft driver in that driver's seat saying like, you doing okay, ma'am? And she's, gripping her chest and saying like, I feel really tight here. And so he diverts his path as a driver to take her to a hospital. So I think there really is no difference, I think, there, the client being human or client being machine, in terms of the baseline issue being addressed, which is, are you allowed to intervene, right? And say, I'm going to make a decision on your behalf as the customer to take you somewhere safe. Now, when I think about mobility for us and our relationship, look, we've had some very interesting. We were one of the earlier cities to say, back by the Night Foundation, say, hey, look, we wanted to push a lot on autonomous vehicles, and we had some great partners at the table. But ultimately, look, every pandemic threw everything in a wrench, and now we've shifted to autonomous delivery systems, more so small scale, last mile solutions. I would also say that, so when you think about our industry relationship, it's very much so, do you want to get on our sidewalks? Do you need access to the curbs? That's like the first check, right? And that triggers a host of permitting and other things. On the other side of it, being more passive is, look, if you are driving down our streets, and a lot of the folks such as Neuro and others have reached out, like, we just want to know who's the best point of contact inside your PD. So if something does happen or the community has questions, there's someone that we can talk to, and they can reach us. Also, they make themselves available to our council members as well as the mayor's office. And so there's, I think, a very healthy relationship there. I would say, once again, I wouldn't look at it just as vehicles. It's like, I would also vehicles on the ground that have four wheels. I'm very interested, once again, in thinking about the future of micromobility. We've got folks like, I think, Link that are doing really cool things, taking a very different approach in terms of the business model as well as the tech stack. But I'm not just advocating for them alone. There are others, thinking about that. And look, all the other big players have always constantly said, like, how do we better address pedestrian or resident considerations for these tools, such as not riding on the sidewalk and creating tracking systems like that. So I wanted just us to focus, like, it's not just the cars, it's everybody tied into this ecosystem. And it's also things going up in the sky. And I'm very interested in eVTOL. And I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity, at least for our region here in Silicon Valley, once traffic is back. And traffic is back, slowly but surely. But I'm really excited for that industry as well to take off. And how do we do that equitably is the thing that I scratch my head on.
There's a lot of things that I'm going to unpack there. And I used to serve as the co-chair of the Autonomous Vehicle Task Force for the City of Beverly Hills, and we would look up to San Jose for inspiration. You're always getting everybody to test. I was like, well, how did they do that? Well, they're in the heart of Silicon Valley. And so we always looked with inspiration for the stuff you were doing there. So, this is going back years, but I want to mention that this, from our perspective, from another city, we were really inspired by what you were doing. And I'll tell you a funny side note. I had a meeting at Velodyne in San Jose, and I had to get to SFO. And I did not realize how bad that traffic gets. And I'm like, please, Mr. Driver, please figure out a way. eVTOL can solve that. I can have a meeting in the south end of San Jose, and I can get to SFO with an eVTOL. That's going to be really interesting to see how that evolves. Is that kind of the routes that you're envisioning when this eventually becomes a reality?
Well, to be honest, yes, in so many ways. But I would also highly recommend that you should just fly out of SJC, our San Jose airport. But I'm going to leave that at there. But you should really check our airport out. They are some of the more innovative folks. I think often when I think of the departments that are being innovative here, or teams inside the city that are innovative. But yeah, look, congestion is a problem, right? My other thing is thinking about what it unlocks in terms of economic opportunities. When you think about, there's been over the last 5-10 years before COVID, there's this whole talk about the death of smaller towns and cities in America, right? And that's true in China and other countries that have experienced rapid urbanization, where you reach that tipping point beyond 50% of your population lives in a mega city or a major city. And so when you think about that, I think this unlocks what a lot of people would want, which is those who live in city don't want that level of congestion and pollution and all things that come with it, as well as hyper increased real estate prices. On the flip side of things, the smaller cities can benefit because now you can actually have younger people living there. It's not just, the elderly. And so there's a little bit more consumer spending, yada, yada, and things like that. And so I think there is a lot of opportunity for this technology to evolve, not just congestion, but also thinking about redesigning economic urban rural models for how these systems are linked economically and also culturally.
That's where it's going to get special, and it's going to get fun because it's going to improve lives. You can have an individual that might want to live in a further smaller town, and they need to get to work, or they be able to send their child to a better school. And so that's where it's really going to get interesting. So I'd love to know, you're doing all this great technology. You're embracing eVTOLs. You're embracing micro. You're embracing autonomous vehicles. I love this, the building better basic strategy that you have going. The one thing that's coming up a lot in the news is privacy, privacy, privacy. What are you doing as you put all this new innovative technology in the city, what are you doing to ensure that your residents and guests in your city can have the privacy that's afforded to them?
I'm really glad you mentioned it. Look, when I joined the city, one of the first things as I was due diligencing, kind of what needs to get done, I was surprised that we did a phenomenal amount of privacy work and it just suddenly halted. And then look, partially halted because of the pandemic. I think also we overthought it, so like, no, and so I started lobbying for the policy, a basic policy to be passed. And so in the end, another team member of ours from the city manager's office, who's no longer with the city, but him and my colleague and my team, they took a lot of effort to really scope out what is the core policy that needs to be done. And so we were very happy, like by December of really 3 months, 4 months into my role, we were already considering putting it on the city council agenda, and then we got it passed in December. That was a big monumental step, I think, that often was overlooked by media, and that's fine. But the thing is, we have a foundational privacy policy that protects our residents, that lays the groundwork and lays the commitment by the city for us to understand privacy as it pertains to not just surveillance, but overall, like what are we doing with and how are we being responsible with data that is considered PII? And so that's, I think, one of the first steps we took. But it's also, I would say it's years of work that happened before that. Now, fast forward, we're in the process of soon, if this budget message goes well, we'll have a formalized chief privacy officer position opened up. We're looking to, have maybe a small team. And also, I would say right now we're exploring ways of thinking about computational law. How do we scale policy overall from a product lens? And so there's a lot of cool stuff happening there that, it's very early. So I can't talk too much about it right now, but I'm really excited for thinking about how we can make privacy better, more engaging for our residents, better educate both internal stakeholders in the enterprise, but also external when it comes to corporate, as well as our residents and community leaders and CBOs. So anybody who wants to know and needs to know, or should want to know, or should need to know, they will be able to know in a very meaningful way versus just reading a dense document. And I think that's hopefully that is where we get to in a world, and that creates a better layer of transparency. The other part is thinking about privacy down the road is, how can people better access information from their governments versus a complicated filing request. So
it's an important first step to build trust. You're building trust with the companies that operate in your city. You're building trust with the residents that live in your city. And it's going to allow you to continue to innovate because the residents will believe in you and they'll trust you as you bring new technologies online to improve their lives. What new technologies do you see coming online from the city in the near future that will help improve the lives of residents and visitors to your city?
Yeah, we have some interesting projects that are cooking right now that unfortunately I'm a bit embargoed, but rest assured that it is coming. And look, sometimes it's not about the coolest gimmicky technology that's out there, right? I think we take a portfolio approach in terms of the things that we want get done, things that have expected values in terms of success, but also outcomes for our residents, and weighed by risks of failure and just not delivering an outcome, even if it's launched successfully. So I would say the most interesting thing is I really hope we come out of the pandemic rethinking how we do public health. What is the city's role in public health? I really hope that long term there is better integration. You see that in kind of people attempting to address homelessness with creating integrated databases, but still respecting the privacy of people who are victims of homelessness or housing insecurities. But I think there needs to be more of an integrated effort to be able to address holistic issues, or to address issues holistically, knowing that people move, that budgets are tied to each other. And more importantly, this is an issue that all of us care about, not just a specific vertical of enterprises.
San Jose cares. You're interacting with the residents of your city. Jordan, we've covered a lot of ground during this conversation. You clearly demonstrated that San Jose is a privacy-first, innovative city that clearly cares about its residents. What would you like our listeners to take away with them from this conversation?
Yeah, just quickly on the privacy thing, I think it's a balance. I think it's important to weigh privacy versus the outcomes that you get. And so I appreciate you spending the time there. But I would say, look, the key thing I want taken away is there's a lot of opportunity for folks to serve in times of need with government, non-for-profits. My biggest thing is, having come out, or we, now are in yellow tier, is when people think about service, you really got to be able to commit to serving. This is not a side project. This is not a side hustle. This is not, hey, I have tech skills, let me drop in for an hour or two. And look, we appreciate that, perspective, but I think it's really important for us to create more models. And I know there's folks at the federal level doing it, folks that, previously, like Chris Kwong and his co-founder also in the digital core, are founding it, is creating more engaging, committed service opportunities in government, both federal, state, as well as local. And I really hope that the takeaway from this is that a career does not have to be purely private or purely public. It does not have to mean fancy titles. It just means, like, what is the impact and outcome out of that career in terms of serving a greater good and a greater need. And I think the industry is thinking along those lines as being pushed towards more ESG type of goals and DEI conversations related to impact. And I really do hope that when people think about their careers, they're also thinking about similarly, what is a commitment that I can give to put true skin in the game to make a difference in people's lives.
Having a positive impact on society is a wonderful thing. It's something that you're clearly excelling at, and millions of individuals around the world are excelling at. So Jordan, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the Road to Autonomy. The future's bright, the future's autonomous, and the future is innovative cities. Jordan, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Road to Autonomy podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter at Road to Autonomy, or email podcast@brulteco.com. The Road to Autonomy is produced by Brulte & Company. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Brulte & Company. The content discussed on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal, tax, investment, or business advice.